It's great to be with all of you today, and I usually start these kinds of speeches by saying, you know, if you're a Democrat or a liberal, you'll probably be offended before we're done. And if you're a Republican and a conservative, you'll definitely be offended before we're done. So I'm sort of the equal opportunity offender when it comes to that. And as it was mentioned, I've spent a lot of my career in different spaces. Spent about the first 25 years mostly doing business consulting, a lot of international work there. My life is sort of a tribute to, if you ever want to make God laugh, just tell him your plan for your life. I was cruising along doing business consulting, moved into Dave's neighborhood, and just happened that 4 houses down from us was Mike Lee. And he was just attorney Mike Lee at the time, so he seemed harmless and nice. So we got to know the Lees, and then of course in 2010 he got a crazy idea to run for the Senate and asked me to do the communication and strategy for that. So we pitched in and helped out, and of course he won in 2010, and I very wisely went right back to business consulting. And it was about a year later, I was actually at the airport in Salt Lake. I was getting ready to fly to Bangkok to give a leadership speech over there. And my cell phone rings, and it's now Senator Lee on the line. And we just were kind of chit-chatting and catching up on a few things. And then all of a sudden it was like I could hear him in stereo. I'm like, "Where are you?" He says, "Oh, I'm at the airport waiting for a flight." And I turned around, and we were literally sitting back to back at adjoining gates. And my wife says that's when he sucked me back into the vortex. So he asked me to be the chief of staff. And so we did that for 4 years and commuted back and forth to DC and survived the swamp and all of those kinds of things. And then came back and was running just a little think tank here in Salt Lake, the Sutherland Institute. And then suddenly ended up at Deseret News and KSL, and so I'm kind of the accidental radio guy today. But I'm excited to talk with you about some of the components of leadership and a lot of the things that you're dealing with as you try to move things forward. And I would say at the outset, and we'll come back to this at the end, that when I look at the state of the country, and first when you hear people say that we are just too divided as a country, don't believe it. It's not true. We are not that divided. We simply are not that divided. But people in positions of power want us all to believe that we're too divided. The most extraordinary thing that I learned going back to Washington, not as a political guy, but as a business guy, is that there aren't that many left and right battles in Washington, D.C. Most of them are the people in power against everyone else. And so as long as they convince us that we're too divided to deal with immigration or health care or whatever it may be, it allows Congress to do nothing, which they do incredibly well. It allows presidents of either political party to do things by executive order, which they love to do, and the status quo remains. I still firmly believe, I passionately believe, we could solve 94.5% of the immigration issue in this country in an afternoon on the floor of the House and the Senate, because everybody agrees. Everybody knows we need a border. Everybody agrees we've got to have an entry-exit system. Everybody knows we've got to have H-1B visas, and you can go on down the list. We need to know who comes in the country and who leaves the country. I mean, if Disneyland can tell me where my family is at any moment in the park for 3 days, surely the greatest country on earth can figure out who comes in and who goes out. So everybody agrees on all of those things, but the problem is both of the political parties raise hundreds of millions of dollars every year off of the wedge issue of immigration. So they would much rather keep the political point than solve the country's problem. And that is the problem, is we continue to do that. And they've sort of conditioned us with this, I call it the shampoo bottle model. And you've probably seen it in your email boxes, and they will lather you up, get you angry, get you frustrated. They'll let you rinse that off with a nice $25 contribution to a campaign, and then they repeat it. So it's lather, rinse, repeat. And they keep everybody stirred up. They raise lots of money. They run political campaigns. They use it as wedge issues. And that, to me, is a leadership problem. What we're dealing with right now back in Washington, you're hearing all the hysteria about the debt ceiling. And the debt ceiling is an important thing that we have to take care of. We do have to pay our bills. So everybody's in this sky is falling panic mode about the debt ceiling. It's not going to happen. I always tell people, just put the panic button away. It's not needed. They're going to fix that. They'll do it in the 11th hour, 59th minute, 59th second, because that's what they like to do, because they can raise more money. Exactly, keep everybody afraid. And they've actually conditioned us to respond inappropriately to negative base emotions. And they just do it over and over and over again. So you'll see it will all come spinning out. To me, we got to get to the underlying problems in terms of our deficit spending. You guys get it because you run businesses every day. And you know that you can't spend more than you bring in, and that you got to manage your resources properly. And they just rather not do that because it's to me, it's a leadership issue overall. So don't panic when you hear all of that for the next 7 weeks until they finally sort it out and come to the table. But to me, the more important thing is we look at that division and we look at what they're telling us, and it does cause a lot of fear, causes a lot of angst and worry and frustration, which of course negatively impacts your business and your people that we're going to get to in just a second. But to me, the thing that we have to remember, I think the most important thing we have to remember, especially as entrepreneurs and business owners, is that you are what drives the country. It's not the politics, it's not what's happening in Washington, D.C. And so you have to remember that the politicians in this country have almost never led, ever. I mean, you go all the way back to the beginning. You look at the founders, and we often talk about the founding fathers as these great, wise, and noble souls, which of course they were. But they were really just a bunch of business owners and entrepreneurs who were tired of being overtaxed, overregulated by a distant government that didn't respond. I know you guys feel that every day. It's still here. But even looking at something like the Declaration of Independence. Declaration of Independence, inspired document, but it wasn't a leading document. It was a lagging document. The Revolutionary War had already been going for 18 months before the politicians got around to putting it down on paper. Now, it was an important galvanizing document for sure, but it wasn't a leading document. Look at Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in Major League Baseball in 1947. It took Congress 17 more years to get around to passing meaningful civil rights legislation. And even the easy stuff, Congress voted against having a Mother's Day. A Mother's Day, think about that. You vote against Mother's Day 19 times. In fact, there was this sweet lady from West Virginia who only wanted to honor her angel mother, and she tried and she tried, and she finally gave up on Congress. Again, they voted against it 19 times. She went back to West Virginia, worked with the state legislature. West Virginia was the first state in the country to have a Mother's Day. And then she didn't stop there. Then she went to Connecticut, and then she went to Vermont, and then she went to New Hampshire. And only after every state in the Union had passed a Mother's Day, then and only then did Congress boldly, courageously declare, we shall have a Mother's Day. And so what we have to remember is that it's community and culture that lead, and the politicians will follow. The politicians will try to convince us otherwise, but that's what we've got to remember. This is what gives me hope in the country. People say, how can you have hope in the country? It's such a mess. And it is exactly what's happening in this room with all of you today is why I have hope in the future of the country. Because it's entrepreneurs, it's business owners, it's people who are out there building things, making things, moving things forward, creating jobs. That's what drives everything. And so I hope one of the things you take away today is recognize your role in all of this. You are the reason there's still hope in the country and what will really drive it forward. And so that means what you do every day, especially as you struggle and deal with a rising generation, young employees that I know can be tricky, difficult, and sometimes downright impossible to manage. And so I want to talk about that for just a little bit. And I want to talk about it in the context of leadership. And I really believe that great leaders, And whether it's in your own business, whether it's in your community, whether it's in the country, whatever it is, great leaders are close enough to the people that they lead to be trusted. You have to be close enough to those employees to be trusted, but you have to be far enough ahead to be worth following. So close enough to be trusted, especially with the younger employees. You got to be close enough to be trusted, but you got to be far enough ahead that you're worth following. Because that is one of the things from this rising generation. They're lost, and they are looking to be led. Now, they may not exhibit that in their behavior. You may think, no, they really don't want to be led. They want a cushy path, and they want time off, and they don't want to be responsible. Those are more just manifestations of where they are. And so if you can lead and connect in the right ways, then you're going to see you actually can get a lot out of them. We've studied a lot with with the younger employees, and they're really an interesting group. They're actually more community focused than their parents. Really interesting. They do it a little different. They'll do an ice bucket challenge, or they'll Venmo somebody some money that needs some help, as opposed to always going out and doing things physically. But they want to be led. They want to be part of something bigger than themselves, and they often don't know how to ask for it. And that's where having that close enough to be trusted connection is really, really vital to you. Because when they feel that, they want to be part of this thing that's bigger than themselves. Everybody wants to be part of a story. Everybody wants to be part of a winning story. And it's amazing how much that actually drives our behavior and our action. Everybody wants that. If you look back, some of you still share the scars with me of the Utah Jazz and the Chicago Bulls in the NBA Finals. So we all know Michael Jordan pushed off. It should have been an offensive foul, but they didn't. And so the Chicago Bulls beat the Jazz in the NBA Finals, which was wrong. They did it on our home floor, which was the Delta Center, and which will once again be the Delta Center, which was also wrong. Then they celebrated in our city, which was really, really, really wrong. And then they got on a plane in the middle of the night and flew back to Chicago. And they landed at Chicago O'Hare at a little bit before 5 o'clock in the morning. And it was a very typical windy, rainy, blustery, early June morning in Chicago. And when they got off the plane at 5 o'clock in the morning, there were 15,000 people waiting for them. Now think about that from a logic standpoint. There's never a good reason to go to O'Hare. Like, that place is, they've upgraded it, but it's still kind of I usually refer to it as the pit of despair. You're there. There's nowhere to park. You're way out. It's just a miserable, horrible place. So why you would go there, let alone go there in the middle of the night in the wind and the rain, to watch 12 tall guys walk off a plane, get on a bus, and drive off. You can't tell me that's high-value entertainment. And so why would they do that? Story. To be able to say, I was there. Do you remember when we won it all? And your employees are exactly the same. They want to be part of something bigger than themselves. They want to be connected to something. They want to feel like what they're doing, it may not be their dream job yet. They may not realize what it is or why it is, but they want to be part of something. And so the more you can help them catch the vision of what you do and why you do it and the difference, the impact that it actually makes, that's the beginning. That's the beginning of really leading this younger generation of workers. Because when they feel that connection, then trust goes way up. And trust is just such a critical part for these kids. That they have to have that ability to believe, okay, you've got my best interest in mind. And as I worked with young people, whether it was back in the Senate, we had an army of young people. In fact, if you want to know the really scary thing about the country, it's that the country is led by a lot of 20-year-olds in Washington, D.C., who do a lot of the work back there. And they do it pretty amazingly well. So I worked with this army of young people interns, people fresh out of college, a lot of first job folks, and helping connect them to the story was a big part of it. And I made the commitment to every single one of them individually when they came in. I would sit down with everyone, whether it was an intern that would only be there for 3 to 6 months, or whether it was someone starting out as a legislative aide or whatever it might be. My commitment one-on-one to them was always this: whether you are here for 6 months or 6 years, when you leave, you're going to leave better, with more skills, more abilities, and more opportunities because you were part of this team. And that's a game changer. And as you're working with your young employees, if they sense that wow, whether I'm here for 6 months or 6 years, I'm going to get what I need to get wherever I want to go next. And suddenly you're part of their game plan. You're part of their life plan. And that really changes the dynamic from what I think we have to do. You have to really go from manager to mentor, from kind of commander to coach. That's really the model we have to get to. And when they feel that, it changes everything. Because suddenly you're part of their story. That's a big shift. And my whole goal when I was chief of staff was I didn't want people to stay in our office. Most offices back there, there's such a scarcity mentality. Everyone just tries to hold everything. You don't share information with other offices because you're looking out for your boss or your senator or your congressperson. And so it's a very much a scarcity mentality. But I would tell our staff every week, and I think it made some of them nervous, this is going to be a season of your life, and I want you to come in, I want you to work like crazy, do some great things, learn some incredible things, and then get out of here and move on. Because my whole goal was to move everybody out and around so that I had influence all across in all the offices as people would get promoted and they would take a new job and they would go to a new place. And that's how you really extend your influence. And I want to tie that in for just a half a second, because I want to go back to something that Dave said at the beginning about this association, because I think this is really important. And I firmly believe that the most important leadership quality for the 21st century is being able to understand allies and alliances. It is the thing. And so let's start on the big level. If we start on the global international level. The United States, we have a host of countries that we are going head to head with on everything. China is a good example. We're going to go head to head with China. We're going to compete. We're going to compete on technology. We're going to compete on economy. We're going to compete against them militarily. We're going to compete with them on human rights. And we're going to go head to head and head to head and head to head. And we also need China in a number of situations. And actually, let's take it one step further. Let's add Russia into the mix. And again, we're going to compete, we're going to go head to head, head to head, head to head. But when it comes to the United States dealing with North Korea, which is really dangerous, the only way that we can have any influence in what is going on in North Korea is through China and Russia. And if we don't have China and Russia on the same page as us in dealing with North Korea, nothing happens there. So, arch enemy, for sure. Head-to-head competitor and a host of different things, absolutely. And we got to be together when it comes with North Korea or Iran. So the same is true in this room. You got people in this room that you're going to go head-to-head, you're going to bid against, compete against, work against, and you're going to need to come together to solve a problem on Capitol Hill in some way they're trying to regulate you. Does that make sense? It is a crucial component that you have allies and alliances, and understanding those. Yeah, you guys are going to compete. You're going to go head to head on a host of things, and that's great. that keeps freedom and the entrepreneurial spirit and a free market economy rolling. And you got to come together. And you can look at all kinds of examples of that. Even some of us are old enough to remember when you'd walk down the street and there'd be like 17 ATMs. Each bank had their own ATM, and it was like a half a block of just ATMs. And so all of those banks are competing with each other, head to head to head to head to head. And now they realize, you know what, we can come together on a host of regulatory issues. We can combine on things that make us more efficient, more effective. There are projects that we can do together. Airline industry is another good example of a lot of compete, but they also have to be aligned and be allies on a number of things. And so just keep that in the back of your mind, especially as it relates to the association. I just think that is so vital, that you learn from each other, that you compete against each other, and that you come together around issues that really matter for all of you. And I think with our young people too, that's part of making sure you get connected there. All right, I want to spend just a second and just do a quick rapid fire in terms of some of these issues that you're dealing with your employees in particular, that we can start whacking at today. Just what are some of the big things, the things that are kind of weighing on you guys, the things that are frustrating day to day? Just what are some of those major issues? I'll just have you know, I always ask for volunteers first, and if everyone looks at their shoes, I just start calling on people, usually from the back of the room first, so choice is totally up to you guys. Yeah.
It seems like the loyalty isn't as much there anymore, where before, if you wanted to get to the top, you put in more work, more effort, and you work your way up.
Yeah.
Now it seems to be easier to, especially in the market where there's no plumbers, they can call anybody in the room and say, well, I'm here, this is mine, give me something better, and everybody will.
Yeah.
And vice versa than me, you know. It just seems like it's so much easier to jump ship and go to the next guy.
Yeah.
How do you get them to understand that working their way up, you can work
Yeah.
your way up?
Yeah.
It takes a little bit longer.
Yeah. Okay, good. Loyalty. We'll come back to that one. What else? Yeah.
So there's also a lot of the problem, and it's the same thing. You're almost afraid to go out and tell them that they've made a mistake, because they're going to jump ship and call him, and he's going to give them a better offer.
Yeah.
You know, so that really is a big fear. How do you actually? And it's not necessarily discipline, teaching discipline at the same time, without the fear of them jumping ship.
Yeah. Good. Awesome.
Right,
Yeah.
The old days, sorry, the owners were kind of in control.
Yeah.
And these days, we're not, we're on pins and needles. You decide, you jumping for costing you $300 a day, or you just shut your mouth and keep going because you may lose it. It's hard.
Yeah. Good. Yeah.
Work ethic seems like it's just, you get more guys in that want to work their 8 and get away with doing as little amount of work as possible rather than
Minimum standard. Yeah.
Big block that.
Yeah. Good. Dave?
So along that line of, discipline or whatever, telling somebody did something wrong, how I used to do it many years ago, we're straightforward now, we're like coddle a little bit to say, okay, next time don't do this. So it seems like our style, we're still telling them what's right and wrong, but it's definitely a different style. That's I found.
Yeah.
And you basically offend them.
Yeah.
In a sense, right?
Along the same loyalty line, it's the customers aren't loyal like they used to be. It used to be people would call you, their kids would call you.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, so-and-so's out this advertisement for cheaper than you.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Yeah.
Some of it's just numbers too. We have an issue in construction industry and trades and getting people who want to work in those fields. And so it's packaging our industry, packaging our companies. But at the same time, we have to present a different image. We're the guys with our pants at half mast under somebody sings. So if they're going to go into a licensed trade, there's only 2, only electrical, and a lot of them are picking electrical. So we have an image to attract
That's
people
good.
to our trade.
Yeah. Awesome. Good. There's
another activity that's happening in our industry, and that's consolidation. Coming in
outside.
Outside the state, they're consolidating everybody under the sun.
Yeah, yeah, good. Okay, anything else? Yeah.
As hope for the future, I am seeing a little bit of a trend of some of these kids coming out of high school now, that they actually want to work,
Yeah.
and you don't have to call them. And what do you want me to do, sir?
What's that sound of that?
Now we're back to competing, yeah.
We may have a generation that we're working with
Yeah.
now, but I have some hope. that
Yeah, there is a pendulum shift, yeah,
be saving grace.
yeah, awesome.
I mean, my own son is a hard worker, but I think he realizes he's gonna take, him and my daughter are gonna take my
Yeah.
business over.
Yeah,
And so he has that fight,
yeah,
you know, that he knows he's got to.
he's got a vision, yeah, yeah, okay, let's go to the back, yeah.
If I don't get it first.
Yeah,
Top of everything else they just put, biggest issue I see right now is influencers. And I've had 5 kids in the last year and a half quit because they were them or their wives that created a YouTube channel.
I have so many thoughts on that.
How do we get kids more interested in the trades?
Yeah.
We're still, everything on the news to the government, it's all STEM, it's all college, it's spend $100,000 and be broke and have a bachelor's in nothing. But yet they're not pushing kids going, okay, you're not meant for school, you need to go to trades. You know, that's not happening,
Yeah,
to get them more in.
yeah, okay, great. Okay,
There is something that is happening. I'm finding that there's an apprenticeship school coming out of Pacey. They're actually, I've got a kid that came in that was already through his first year in high school.
yeah,
And a good worker.
yeah. Yeah, and I think there is a
The smaller communities in their teaching styles.
It makes
and
sense.
let's
Yeah.
Look at trades, let's look at.
The farming community kind of things like that.
Yeah, let's get these kids some kind of a trade and some kind of a
Yeah.
opportunity here.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of a groundswell going on.
there is, and I actually think,
Not necessarily in the big cities,
yeah,
but around us, there is something that's going on.
yeah. I actually think there's some things on the federal level that are going to push that as people realize. Obviously, there's the great debate of what is the value of a college education anymore, and how many are coming out with mountains and mountains of debt and nowhere to go and no real skills to apply. And so I think there is this little pendulum that's starting to swing in terms of where are the real opportunities. And to me, the most important thing, whether it's a kid coming through high school and into trade, or whether they're going to a university and going through that path, the only thing that actually matters, the shelf life of a college degree in today's world is 18 months. You basically get an 18-month head start. But with we have more changes in one of our 24-hour days than our parents had in decades of their lives. And so the most important skill anyone's going to learn in formal education or higher education is learning how to learn, the discipline of learning. But the most important thing is to learn to love learning, because that's going to be the differentiator. And you guys all know this because you're constantly learning. You're constantly learning, relearning, unlearning, and moving it forward. And that's the real test. I had a really interesting afternoon one time in D.C. with David McCullough, who I think is one of the great historical writers of our time, a great storyteller. And we were actually at the Library of Congress, so it was kind of fitting. We were just like surrounded by all of these, history books, and he started telling me his story. So he was at Columbia University as a journalism student, and David McCullough hated history. So that's an interesting thing. One of the great historical writers of our time hated history. In fact, he hated history so much that he put off taking his required history course until his last semester of his senior year at Columbia. And he just hated it. He hated memorizing dates and events, and it just was not his thing. And so finally, last semester, here he is having to go to a freshman history class. And it was in this massive auditorium. And he said he was sitting at the back of the hall just grumbling that he had to take this stupid history course. And the professor walked in, and it wasn't even a real professor, it was a graduate student. And he's like, oh my gosh, this is just ridiculous. And so he's sitting there, and the graduate assistant gets up there, and he says, now, I need to tell you the most important thing you need to know about this class. And that is that I am never, ever going to test you on a date, a fact, or a location of any event in history. And David McCullough said it was like the windows just blew open. And history was no longer just this laundry list of things you had to memorize, but it became this unending river of ideas and principles to explore. And it changed everything, changed the direction of his life. And really interesting, just as a full circle moment, about 5 years ago, David McCullough was getting an honorary degree down at USC. And as they were going into the big banquet the night before, the president of the university was telling David who was going to be sitting at his table. And he said, now there's one guy that you'll be sitting with tonight who you have something in common with. He was also a Columbia graduate. He was 96 years old, still taught one class in history at USC, and it turned out that it was that graduate assistant that had literally changed David McCullough's life forever. But the principle there is this idea of lifelong learning. And for all of the young people that are working for you, if you can help them recognize that what we do in our business is we're all constantly learning. Really interesting, there was a U.S. ambassador to England, and he kind of ran in this circle of people who were clearly going to be influencers around the world, not in the TikTok variety, but in government and in business. And they started having this little study group, this little dinner group. They would get together once a month and just, talk about different things. And the ambassador decided that as he looked at all of these people, he realized that one of the things that we've lost in the world is our inability to be wrong. And recognize it or not, a lot of the young people that are working for you have a fear of being wrong that is off the charts. Like, it is so unnatural, unhealthy. A lot of them were raised by helicopter parents. A lot of them had to specialize and become a second baseman by the time they were 8 years old, because that's how you can get on the Super League team, and then you can travel and this hyper specialization, and there's no space to fail. And so the ambassador created this dinner group, and they would bring in these amazingly successful people, and the only thing they wanted them to talk about was their biggest failure. They called it blooper night. And for a lot of those young people that you're leading, again, it manifests itself in some really interesting ways, but you just need to know, they are so afraid of being wrong, and they are so afraid of failure. And I know a lot of the work that you do, you go through fail-safe systems. And whether that's plumbing or electrical or whatever it may be, having that fail-safe system, and what you've got to create is an environment in your workplace is a fail-safe, as in safe to fail space, where they can say, hey, yeah, I'm not sure what to do about this, or help me with this, or I think I got this wrong, and then help them get it right. But you got to create space for that, because if they're hunkered down, so many of them are just walking around in this defensive crouch. It's why a lot of them are stressed, and why a lot of them, they'll see, I can get an extra $5 an hour here, or I can do this job and get this. And so they're bouncing, they're looking. And so as leaders, if you create that space and that stability where it's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to learn, and whether I'm here 6 months or 6 years, I'm going to leave better with more opportunities and more skills. I'm going to be a forever learner in this industry, and I can create a space to really do something that can be meaningful for me, for my family, for my community. And I think that's a part of it. And so I want to look at some of the components that are going to help us make that happen. And I think a lot of us, we've kind of heard walking on eggshells. We're kind of pins and needles. We're worried about losing people. And so I want to look at a couple of things that kind of bring that temperature down just a little bit. One of the things that I think is real vital is how we approach the interaction with them. And so I actually need 7 of you to be brave volunteers and help me out here for a minute. I promise I will not make you do a group hug or anything overly embarrassing. So I get 7 volunteers. Who's going to help? Don't make me call on people. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Come on. All right. I'll just have you spread out across the front here. All right. So here's the rules. I'm just going to hand each of you just a plain white sheet of paper. And the rules are that you must keep your eyes and your mouth closed. Okay? Everybody okay with that? It won't be long, I promise. All right, so go ahead and close your eyes, put your hands out. I'll give you a sheet of paper, and we will begin. Maybe. All right. Now, again, keep your eyes and mouth closed. What I want you to do is I want you to take your piece of paper and I want you to fold it in half. And I want you to tear off the top right-hand corner. Okay, fold your paper in half again. And tear off the bottom right-hand corner. And fold your paper in half one more time. And tear off the top right-hand corner. Okay. Go ahead and open your eyes, unfold your paper, and hold it up really high so everybody can see. This is a new one. All right.
Say is the right.
That's also just interesting. Okay. All right. Give them all of them a hand for being brave. You can go ahead and sit back down. You keep that as a souvenir. All right. Now, you all heard me. I gave them all the exact same instructions. And yet we came up with 7 very different outcomes. So my first question is, under those circumstances, would it have been possible for me to get all 7 of them to the same result? Okay, I have a couple yeses, I have a few no's. Those of you who are saying no, are you saying no, not these 7 people? Or are we always have to check? You are saying that. Okay. All right, those of you who are saying yes, let's talk about what could I have to get everybody to the same result?
Tell them exactly how to hold the paper to begin with.
Okay.
Know where the right and the left and the bottom.
Okay, so some orientation to begin with, so that everybody was starting from the exact same spot. Excellent.
Show them.
We could have gone through it in advance. I could have done a little preview for sure. What else could I have done?
Take all of the individuality out of it. So you have to tell them exactly every step to make, how to make it, when to make it, and what to do, what the ultimate goal is.
Okay, so get very, very laser specific there, right? In terms of that. Good. What else? What else could I have done?
Participation trophies.
Participation trophies. Everybody's a winner. You're all awesome. What else could I have done?
Let them open their eyes.
Okay. There's always one cheater in the group. No. No, this is actually a really important thing. I created 2 significant barriers to their success because they couldn't open their eyes and they couldn't open their mouths. And think of how often we do that. And we set people up for failure because we actually put some barriers in the way. So that's actually a great one. Anything else? Anything else I could have done?
Let them talk.
Let them what?
Let them talk.
Yeah, again, ask questions, create that space for that. And even if I had kept them with eyes and mouth closed, what if I had just provided some feedback along the way? What if I would have just stopped them and said, oh wait, you're folding it vertical instead of horizontal, or you turn it to the right instead of to the left, or I'm not sure what some of you did, but I want to reconstruct that after. But I'm sure we could have gotten everybody there.
Could put everybody in a circle and we could have watched each other do it and make sure everybody was doing the same.
Yeah, so we could have created a collaborative space for that to happen. Yeah. Yeah, and here's what we're going for. Desired result looks like this. So now step back and think about how often you've been frustrated with one of your people, one of your employees, and now walk back through kind of that feedback, through that opportunity. Did you create barriers? Was there a clear expectations? Was there specifics? Was there an opportunity for them to ask to get feedback there? Were you able to give any course correction along the way? It doesn't mean you have to micromanage, but is there space for that to happen that's safe, where they're not feeling like they're coming with a failure, but they're coming with something to learn so that they can be better? And so those are all pieces, especially for these younger workers. If you can create that space in your organization, that's a game changer. Because it actually empowers people to take smart risks, to lean in and learn, and you become a learning organization. And if I were doing the rebranding of your trade, I would call it the learning organization. Because that is what you do every day. And you solve problems. And the only way you solve problems is you all stay incredibly curious. And you're trying to figure out what's not working. Why is it not working? Why did this not go the way we mapped it out or we drew it out? And that problem-solving skill is one that is totally transferable, transportable. And I think it's part of the rebranding of the industry. This is where you go to be a problem solver. And that's what our communities need. It's what our families need. It's what the country needs. It's people who are empowered to be problem solvers and not be victims, not be just divided by the rage and all the other stuff going on around them. But when you're part of a problem solving, learning, curious, I've been saying a lot lately, I think one of the greatest threats to our country is a lack of curiosity. That we've stopped learning. We've stopped even wondering. Everybody's so into their own little social media bubble or their own self-constructed bubble in their life that they're not even looking outside. And one of the real challenges for the younger employees is that I call it the dot connectors. That you don't have a lot of dot connectors because they've all specialized in things since they were really young. Again, whether it was piano, whether it was a sport, whether it was science or math or whatever it is, people are specializing, and you just don't have the dot connectors. And that's what you guys do every day. You're constantly trying to connect the dots. And for people to recognize, I can go into this business and I can learn these skills that I can use anywhere, anytime. Again, that becomes part of their story. And that creates loyalty. That creates people who are not just looking at, if I can earn an extra buck an hour or an extra few bucks a job, to saying, you know what, I'm staying with this company or this group because I'm getting better and I'm learning, and it's now part of my story. So creating that space for the feedback, and again, you don't have to walk on eggshells. The young workers, they want it. They want that feedback. They don't know how to ask for it. And then when they don't get it, they're so stressed internally that often leaving is the easiest thing for them to do. Because then they can justify in their mind, well, I left because he's a jerk, or he wouldn't pay me enough, or she wouldn't do this. And so they're just bouncing because they don't have that trust. And so creating that space for that feedback environment is such a big part of that. I think one of the other elements that goes with that, this is one of those things that I learned the hard way. A number of years ago, I was doing a lot of international travel, and we had just had our third out of our 5 children. And I had gone on a speaking tour in Europe, so I'd been gone for about 3 weeks. And so my wife was at home with a newborn and 2 young ones. And I came home from the tour, and it was a Saturday morning, and Debbie and I got into the car, and we were just driving to the mall. And we're driving down to the mall, and for some reason, Debbie turned into the ultimate backseat driver. I could do nothing right. And she was letting me know I could do nothing right. And it was, you're going too fast. Watch out, you see that kid on the bike? This is the long way. Why are you going this way? Your blinkers on, dear. And on and on and on it went. And of course, the further it went, the tighter I was gripping the steering wheel. And just when I'd had it, I was just getting ready to launch into my, hey, shut up, I'm driving, I got this. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Boyd, if you must speak, ask a question. And so I did. I turned over to Debbie and I very nicely asked, Debbie, is my driving making you nervous? And it was amazing. The moment I asked the question, all of the tenseness in her shoulders just dropped. She said, no, not really. I'm like, really? And of course, what I found out is the problem was not my driving. The problem was she'd been home for 3 weeks with 3 little kids, and she was behind on a couple of projects. She was frustrated with some things around the house. And as I look back at that, I thought, if I would have gone into my shut up, I'm driving routine, pretty certain things would have escalated. We probably would have ended up with a very quiet ride to the mall. But by asking the question, I was actually able to get down to the real issue. And we actually had a very productive ride to the mall. We got some things sorted out. I figured out what I needed to do to best help her accomplish the goals and the project she was working on. If you don't take anything else out of our session this morning, just imprint that on the front of your brain. If you must speak, ask a question. It is amazing. I am convinced you can do far more with a question than you can ever do with a statement. With a question, you can calm somebody down. With a question, you can diffuse a real hostile or volatile situation. I actually think in an argument, the best way to get your point across is to frame it in the form of a question. Think of some of your recent arguments. Normally when we get into the argument mode, nobody's listening. Because once I decide I'm right and you're wrong, the listening power is down. And usually you get the deadly 3 body language signs that go with it. You get the arm fold, the eye roll, and the deep sigh all at once. And if you were like my teenage daughters, you put a little hip action into it as you do the, So rather than just do this, if you just phrase it in the form of a question, everything changes. Because you can just ask, well, had you considered this? Or did you try this strategy? Or if we did it this way, do you think that would get us the result that we need? So you're not changing your opinion at all. But by phrasing it in the form of a question, you're allowing the other person to be much more relaxed, much more open, and much more likely to buy into what you're saying. Now, a couple of very important rules with your questions. It must be a sincere, non-sarcastic question. I could have asked Debbie, do you want to drive? Technically, that's a question. Would not have helped my cause a whole lot. So it's got to be a sincere, non-sarcastic question, and you must be willing to listen to the response. And it is amazing what you can do. We could spend the next 3 hours talking about all the different scenarios and settings to use questions. Let me give you one specific because I think it's important for your younger workers. I actually believe that the best way to give praise is to do it in the form of a question. And normally we do just the opposite. We make statements. So for example, your daughter's on the soccer team and she scores the winning goal. Our natural reaction, we give praise. You're great, you're the best, you're the All-American, you're number one, you're the champ, way to go. All of those are statements. There is a huge shift if instead you ask a question. Man, what were you thinking when you saw that ball sailing towards the top corner of the goal? How did you feel when that hit the back of the net knowing you just won the game for your team? And it completely changes the emphasis from the act to the individual. And people will get far more validation to their self-confidence and their self-esteem by having a chance to share with you their thoughts about a performance than they will ever get from just listening to your statements of praise. And how often do we do that on the job? Someone comes through, they get it done, and we say, yeah, good job, way to go, you're the man, you're the best. We make statements. And again, especially with these younger workers, it only takes a minute. But if you just slow it down and say, wow, how did you do that? Or what made you think that that was the best way to solve that? And it completely changes. And again, it creates that trusted connection and puts you in a leadership space where you're someone who's worth following. So if you must speak, ask a question. You'll find yourself using that in all kinds of different places in your life.
So do you do like marriage counseling too?
I'll let Dave talk about my wife Debbie. Most of what I've learned from my wife Debbie. So, but it is a true thing, and it's amazing. Try it at home.
I would have been that one. Do you want to drive?
Yeah. Yep. And I had one blessing. I have 7 sisters, so I was properly trained and schooled. 6 of them were older sisters, and the only downside was I had no idea what a hot shower was until I moved out of the house. It was like, that was such a radical thing. Sunday mornings were the worst because everybody's trying to sleep in, and then I'd hear the bathroom door close, and once one of the girls was in, it was like just cycle through, just on and on and on. So we knew it was over. But anyway, the questions are just a real powerful thing. And then just tag team that with listening. Listening has just become such a lost art in the world today. Everybody's in a hurry. We're racing. We're chasing. And if you ever want a good challenge, just take a week and really evaluate your listening. There's basically 4 different levels that we function on when we listen. The first really isn't even listening at all. It's actually called ignoring, and most of us are really good at it. It's amazing. I can hear everything Debbie's telling me right up to the point she asks if I can, take out the trash or go mow the lawn or clean the garage. But we get really good at it. We learn to smile. We nod our head. We say but we're really ignoring. Nothing's really getting through. The second kind of listening is selective listening. So that's where you're hearing only what you want to hear. And again, most of us are pretty good at that as well. So ignoring, selective. Third level is where we start to get a little better, reflective listening, where you can actually reflect back or paraphrase back to the other person what they told you. And that's pretty good. Because really, more than anything else, people want to know that they were heard and that they were understood. And when you can reflect back what they said to you or paraphrase back, that's a strong thing. And the fourth level where we really want to get as the driver is empathic listening, where you're listening with empathy, where it's not just words and phrases, but you're really trying to figure out what's the meaning and intent. What are they really trying to share with me? And so if you want to test, just take 7 days, just jot it on your phone, create a note page or jot it in a notebook somewhere, and just catch yourself functioning on each of those 4 different levels of listening. And if you'll do it for 7 days, I guarantee you will see some fascinating patterns begin to emerge. You will discover there are some people in life, the moment you see them coming, you go into the ignore mode. And there'll be some people you're real empathic with and some you're real selective with and so on. And the important thing is to recognize when you're doing it and why you're doing it. Is it just out of habit? Is it because you're in a hurry? Is it because something's going on in your world that you're frustrated with? But listening to me is a real catalyst for trust. Because again, when people feel like they've been heard and understood, then that changes the dynamics of everything. So between listening, asking questions, creating that space for feedback, those are all really crucial pieces of the puzzle. And I would just add one other thing on listening. If you ever want some good reading, one of my favorite rabbis, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, he was the chief rabbi in the UK, one of the great moral voices of our time, brilliant writer. And I got to interview Rabbi Sacks. In fact, it ended up being his last interview. He ended up having a real serious cancer that took him just in a matter of weeks, which was just a great loss. But he was an engager in a really interesting way. And in the UK, there was a guy by the name of Amos Oz, who was an atheist. And not just any atheist, he was a loud and angry atheist. And he and Rabbi Sacks crossed paths, and Rabbi Sacks asked if they could go to lunch. And there was a huge uproar in the Jewish community. And in fact, it went into all the papers across England that the rabbi was going to meet with the atheist. And in the Jewish community, they were like, this guy trashes everything you hold sacred. He doesn't just disagree. He's angry, he's vindictive. It's filled with contempt. Why would you do that? But Rabbi Sacks said, no, we're going to go. I'm going to go have lunch and have a great conversation. And as he was getting ready to leave, there was this big rush outside of the synagogue as he was leaving, getting into the car. I mean, you had the paparazzi people there. I mean, it was just big national event over these two people meeting. And one of the journalists shouted at Rabbi Sacks and said, "Rabbi, what are you going to do? Are you going to go convert him?" And Rabbi Sacks got back out of the car and he said, "No, I'm going to do something far, far more important. I'm going to listen to him." And it was the beginning of a most unusual friendship. They actually ended up touring all over England and Europe, showing what conversation looks like with people that you disagree with. It was just fascinating. And so that ability to actually listen in the heat of the moment, in times when it's really tough, when it's difficult people, that's the real test. Because to me, that's the test of leadership. I've always said that, we talk about things like honesty and integrity. A person is not honest just because they've never had a chance to lie. And a person is not a great leader or a great listener just because they've always been able to do command and control. And I think that's the leadership test for all of us. It's a leadership test in the trench, in the day-to-day, with the tough customer, with the challenging employee, with that manager, that person you're trying to get to lead everybody else. Those are the tests of leadership. I always say that when the sea is calm and the breeze is light and the sun is out, every boat in the harbor has a great captain. But when the sea's rough and the wind is wailing and the storm is out, that's when you find out who knows actually how to captain a ship. And you better hope you're on a ship that has a captain. And that's what all of you do in your businesses, is you are that captain. And you have to lead on the storm. and the rough seas and the challenging times. But I think as you start to connect people in just a little bit different kind of way, I think that takes down some of that angst or anxiety about confronting, because it's no longer about a confrontation, it's about a solution. And the young people will respond to that. If the young employee feels like it's a confrontation, then yeah, they're going to be I think a lot of our young people walk around in a defensive crouch, like they're waiting to be offended. And I'm sure you actually have some employees that are actually preemptively offended because they know you're going to be a jerk about this, or they know you're going to hammer them on that, or they know you're not going to be fair about this. And so they're waiting to be offended, and then when it happens, then they're offended, and then they leave and go somewhere else. And so part of the role of the great leader is being able to get people out of a defensive crouch so that you can actually lead. You can't lead anybody who's just hunkered down. You got to have an open hand and not a clenched fist as a leader today. And the amazing thing that you will see, the byproduct of that, is the kind of loyalty that you're wanting and hoping for in your employees. Because as you invest in them, as you create space where they feel like they're learning, where they feel like they're part of that winning story, all of those things changes the dynamic. And they will get out of their defensive crouch and be willing to be taught because they want to be led. They really do. Don't be fooled. I know you've got some employees who come in with 3 chips on both shoulders, and they're just they're ready for the hostilities to begin. And your job is to just create space and just brush a few of those chips off as you go. It's just part of cleaning, and then get them in space. Yeah.
Something I've noticed, I've been doing this now for 30 years, is that when I go out to the job site, I'm interacting with my people, and I'm trying to find new premises, and
Yeah.
everybody that's on the job site, I don't need to prove to them that I'm their boss. I don't need to build myself up. I sign the check, and pretty much know who
Yeah.
the boss is. They're there to please the company, they're there to make me happy to some degree.
Yeah.
I try to put myself in a position of, hey, how's it going today? And single them out as to,
Yeah.
hey, last time we talked, you were going through this, is everything okay? That goes so much farther as you being the boss. You're not necessarily their friend,
Yeah.
necessarily, but you're in a position of empathy as to, I'm
Yeah.
here, I'm listening, I do care about you, and you're part of the team.
Yeah.
And I'm not better than you.
It's a role.
You're as much of me as I am of you.
Yeah.
And you put yourself in that position. When I walk in the door to come home, I am my wife's husband. She's the leader of the home. You're the leader of your company. You walk through that door and everything changes.
Yeah.
And it's something that I've noticed about 15 years ago is like, you realize what you do when you walk in that door? You realize what you do when you walk on that job site? You're really positioning yourself a lot different than you are when you're sitting
Yeah.
behind that desk.
That's right. That's right. And to me, that's the whole thing of how you make that move from a manager to a mentor, from a commander and a boss to a coach. And to me, that's the real essence of how we get to the bottom of leadership, because that is actually where the leadership begins. It's not a top down.
And if you have to prove to your employees that you're the leader, you're not.
We actually have a saying at my house: if you have to declare it, you're not it. So when our teenagers would declare, hey, I'm an adult now, it's usually because they were about to make a very childish decision. And the same thing is true whether it's in your company, whether it's in the country. If you have to declare it, you're not it. If you have to declare yourself the leader, you are not the leader. And that's just how it rolls. And so I think all of those things fit in there. And I hope that as you continue through the day today, I hope you start thinking through the real test of this. I often tell people, they say, oh, how can you talk about politics every day? That's got to be depressing. And I remind people that I only talk about politics so that I can comment on society. And the only reason I do social commentary is so I can talk about principles and the people who live them. And I've really spent most of my life just studying leaders and watching what happens when real leaders act and create space and develop a story, because that's where the magic happens. And it's really right back where we began the morning, and that is what really drives this country. And for years we have focused on a diplomatic policy that is we dump a bunch of money into developing nations, and we kind of prop up these little democracies, and then slowly they start sliding their way back towards autocracy and socialism, and on it goes. And then we dump in some more money and we kind of prop it back up and hope that everything will be okay for another season. And I'm convinced that if we really wanted to make that difference, the real leadership would be creating space for entrepreneurs and for small business owners, because that is what drives freedom. I've had some really interesting conversations just in the last week with some people who know their way around Russia and know their way around China. And it's so interesting. Vladimir Putin does not fear a single sanction that the United States or any other country is going to put on Russia. He has no fear and obviously no conscience about those that are part of his military, because he just doesn't care. And the same can be said about President Xi in China. They're not worried about sanctions. They're not worried about economy. They're not worried about military strength. One of the main reasons, I think it is the reason, the greatest threat to Vladimir Putin staying in power, which is his goal, the greatest threat was an entrepreneurial and upwardly mobile Ukraine. Ukraine was not perfect at the start of the war, be really clear. But they were doing some things from a government standpoint that was creating space so that people could start businesses, and they could expand their jobs, and they could buy a house, and they could create their own version of a Ukrainian dream. And then they would call their relatives in Russia, or their Russian relatives would call them, and they would describe this freedom to have a job, to start a business, to get a house, to have a strong community. That's what dictators fear the most, is people experiencing that upward mobility and opportunity. And at the heart of that are small business owners. And so for everything that we hear about all the importance of Washington and capital cities around the world, it is right back to where we started. It's community. It's what you guys are doing every day. It's the young people you're leading. It's the customers you're servicing. It's the communities that you're building and strengthening. And I know there's not a one of you in the room today that isn't also involved in your community. And whether that's coaching Little League or helping a neighbor in need, that's the name of the game. And that's why I have great confidence in the future of the country. I'll never forget in 2016, the Saturday morning after the election, and obviously that was a bruising battle of an election, divisive as they come. Although we've had those before, we just kind of forget. In fact, just a quick historical note. I still think the most contentious election in our history was Jefferson. When Jefferson won the presidency, it was the first time that a political party shift had happened. And if you read the newspaper accounts of the day, they were afraid that there was going to be a riot that would lead to rebellion and the destruction of the nation. And Jefferson did an interesting thing that day. So both Washington and Adams had shown up for their swearing in as president in military garb with a ceremonial military sword. And the newspaper accounts say that Jefferson went in dressed as an ordinary citizen. He left the sword at home. And that's a pretty good model for us. Whether that's a verbal sword, whether that's an online sword, a social media sword, he just set it down. And so those kinds of transitions and those kinds of challenges. And so after 2016, again, a lot of us, I think all of us, were exhausted and just wondering where we were. And I admit I was exhausted. It had been around the clock doing commentary, writing. It was nonstop, and I was so done. And on that Saturday morning, Dave will remember this, and JP will probably remember this. In our little neighborhood in Cedar Hills, we have an annual 1K donut run. 1K. It's the length of Dave's street. The race is technically over before it starts. And I didn't want to go. And my wife said, come on. It's the thing. Let's go. And I was not happy about it, but I got up. We have this little grassy bowl retaining area. And there were people there, and there were some students from BYU who had seen it on social media, and they all came, and there were T-shirts and raising some money for a good cause. And the race started, and it was over. And then for the next several hours, everybody just stayed. Everyone just stayed. And I thought, that's it right there. It's community. It's culture. It was one leader, our friend Denise Anderson, who does that every year. And we laugh and joke about, how hard it is to train for a 1K donut race. But it's bringing people together. It's community and culture that lead. The politicians will follow. And I think as you continue to lead and as you tweak slightly the way you lead to create space for this younger generation of workers, don't let them fool you. They are hungry. They are thirsty. They want to be led. They want to learn. They want to have a path. And you all provide that. And to me, that is what leadership looks like. And that's what leadership acts like. And that's what will keep your business being successful. That's what will make our community strong. And that's what will continue to make the country we live in the most extraordinary place on earth. I was talking with Ambassador Jeff Flake, who is the ambassador to Turkey. And they're in the middle of a broiling election there. And of course, after the earthquake, there's lots of devastation, lots of challenges. And he said something to me just last Wednesday. He said, Boyd, when I became the ambassador, the first thing they told me is that the thing you have to understand about embassies, United States embassies around the world, is that there are always two things going on. He said, there will not be a day during your ambassadorship that there will not be a loud, angry protest in front of the embassy. And there will not be a day when the line trying to get a visa to get into the United States of America will be longer and bigger than the angry mob outside the door. And so, yeah, we have faults and flaws and problems in our community, in our state, in the country, and it's still the best place there is. But the important thing to remember is why. And the reason why is what I'm looking at this morning. And I hope you see that in each other as you compete against each other. Go at it. Go to town. Do it right. Do it with integrity. And then be allies. Help each other. Support each other. Keep your arms linked together so that you can deal with bureaucracy and regulation and things that get in your way from being successful, because you have to do that. And I'll just end with a reminder about the regulatory pieces that frustrate you to no end, especially those that are coming from the federal level. Congress loves to pass bills that sound awesome. We shall have clean air. Like, who's going to vote against that? And then it will say in the text of the bill, it will say, we hereby bequeath the power to decide what is clean air and what that means and what the penalties are for those who make dirty air, and we bequeath all of that to the executive branch in the EPA. But they passed the bill and everybody cheers, woohoo, we shall have clean air. And then when one of you guys is dealing with one of these ridiculous regulatory burdens that's preventing you from being able to do your job and to do it better and safe and all those other things, and you go to your member of Congress or to your representative and you're like, this is killing me. This is killing me. And your representative can say, hey, I just voted for clean air. If you have a problem, go talk to the EPA. They're the problem. And of course, if you go there, they're going to say, you can't fire me. You didn't elect me. I'm just in the bureaucracy. I'm just doing my job. And so that's part of the problem. And that's part of what we have to change, both here at the state level. And for the most part, Utah does way better than most of the states around the country in terms of a lighter touch. But I know there are still things that just sneak in a bureaucracy that cause you guys all kinds of headaches. But that's when you really have to link arms and come together because you can do it and you can change it. And to me, that's part of the process that we all have to lean into because you can make a difference in that. You can change it. You just have to know how to do it, and you can't do it alone. You guys have to link arms and be allies on those big fronts, moving all of that forward. So let me just conclude with one thought, and then I'm going to race down, and the former vice president's in town today. And if you're in between sessions or during lunch, you can turn it on. We're going to have the vice president on. And regardless of what you think about his or any politician's politics, I'm always interested in what are their principles and what is it that really makes them tick. And to me, that's always the test of a leader. What is it? What's the driving principle behind what they do? And so that's the conversation I'm going to go have with the former vice president because he has some pretty interesting things. And we've connected a few times over the years, back to when he was governor. And he has some principles that are worth listening to. And we have to just watch what kind of leaders we validate. It's so easy to chase the anger, fear, frustration crowd. And I'll actually quote my favorite Nebraska Senator, Ben Sass. He said, sadly, what we mostly have in politics today is a form of performative jackassery. And so that is officially from, I get in trouble every time I say that on the radio, but I say, I'm just quoting the senator. But sadly, that's what it is. People are doing that performative stuff because it gets clicks, it gets likes, it gets campaign donations, it gets them on cable news. But to me, it comes back to the principles and where are we trying to lead, where are we trying to go. And so on one hand, I'd encourage you to watch differently at leaders. Look at leadership just a little different than you have in the past. Keep learning, stay curious, and then be that kind of leader. There's a great poem that I learned growing up that I think epitomizes what all of you do every day, especially as you think about your young workers. And it says, he stood at the crossroads all alone, the sunlight in his face. He had no thought for the world unknown. He was set for a challenging race. But the road stretched east and the road stretched west, and the lad knew not which road was best. So he chose the road that led him down, and he lost the race in the victor's crown. At last he was caught in an angry snare because no one stood at the crossroads there to show him the better way. Another day at the selfsame place, a boy with high hopes stood. He too was set for a challenging race. He too was seeking that which was good. But one stood there who the roads did know and showed the lad which way to go. So he shunned the road that led him down, and he won the race and the victor's crown. And today he walks the highway fair because one stood at the crossroads there to show him the better way. And to me, that's the essence of leadership. You're standing there at the crossroads for a lot of these young workers. Never, ever underestimate your influence and the difference that you can make in one person's life. Our country, I always say, was founded within the parentheses of a crazy idea. And most of the greatest moments in our history have been within the parentheses of some pretty crazy ideas. And to me, the craziest idea of our time is the simplest and most sane idea of our time, and that is a return to real leadership. And so I thank you for your leadership, for being at the crossroads, for the impact you make on not just those that you work with and those that you get stuff done with, but the difference that you make in the community, because you are the heart and soul of the country. You'll hear a lot about a battle for the soul of the nation. They don't need to look anywhere further than this room, and they'll find it. And thank you for being part of it, and thanks for letting me be with you this morning. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you.